Hello friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Michelle Fondin and I'm the author of Heal Yourself, A Return to Wholeness, the Integration of Body, Mind, Soul, and Spirit. All of my books are available in paperback, Kindle, and Audible books. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Thank you for subscribing below. Click on the bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. And thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. I do tarot readings, 30, 60, and 90-minute readings, twin flame romance, general readings, life path and purpose. You can book that at my website, michellefondinauthor.com. Welcome to my brand new series on this book, Heal Yourself, A Return to Wholeness, the Integration of Body, Mind, Soul, and Spirit. And this new series is going to help you to heal and to integrate the aspects of yourself where you feel chaotic, where you feel divided. Today's topic is the source of suffering. So this is a super deep and esoteric series that I'm doing for this book. Now, if you want to follow along, pick up a copy of this book on Amazon in any of the formats. I would highly recommend. If you're going to do the Audible, also download it for Kindle, just so you can kind of follow along. And even though the book is relatively short, it is jam-packed with spiritual lessons. And this is kind of where the channel is headed. I know many of you have come to the channel with twin flame videos, but self-healing, this is really where the channel is headed. So I will do a vlog next week when I'm out of town. If you're watching this on August 16th, which is the new moon in Leo, if you're watching this video in August of 2023, just know that we're starting this series. The series is gonna run for several weeks, and it's gonna really help you to dive deep into your own process of healing. So let's go ahead and take a look at the source of suffering. This is a humongous topic. It is so huge that I may make this video into two parts. So if I decide to do that at the end of the video, this would be part one of the source of suffering. Suffering has been studied over the ages. In fact, the Buddha himself, Siddhartha, studied suffering and the transcendence of suffering. You see, the Buddha, who is known as Gautama Siddhartha, was raised as royalty in India. I think it was about 500 BCE, if I'm not mistaken. If you know the exact dates, please help me out here. I don't know if the exact dates are traceable. So I think most people know that there's like a span of time, but it was definitely BCE. So Siddhartha was raised in a castle, right, within the confines of the walls of royalty. And when Gautama Siddhartha was an infant, it was predicted, as in India, there was also predictions when an infant is born as to what is my child's life path, most notably, what is my son's life path. And the seer at the time, the rishi, the seer at the time, said, your son will either be a priest or a king. And the parents wanted to keep Siddhartha cloistered within the confines of the castle walls because they did not want their son to become a priest. Now, everybody knows famously that Siddhartha did not become a king, but rather a Brahmin or a priest or a Sidhu. In fact, he was more a solitary spiritual person rather than someone leading a congregation. In fact, he elected for a life of solitude to discover the reasoning of suffering. Why do we suffer as humans? Why are we born into this world with so much intense suffering? And that is what we all seek in essence, especially as we embark upon a spiritual journey, is what is the source of my suffering? Why do I have to suffer? Now we can look at physical suffering is one aspect of that, but when I speak about suffering, I'm mostly speaking to internal suffering, emotional, psychological, existential angst, if you will. The whys of life. Why do I feel dissatisfied so much of the time? Why do I feel turmoil on the inside of me so much of the time? Why do I feel discontent even when things seem to be going well? And many religions have tried to explain the source of suffering. Now, of course, many monotheistic religions, such as Christianity, Judaism, Islam, explain the source of suffering in some way, shape, or form across these monotheistic religions as original sin, right? We are born bad. We are born with a taint on our soul. We are born with something that we need to pay back. Now, of course, Christianity has a solution for that, in that if you follow Jesus, who died on the cross for our sins, then you will be absolved of this original sin. But even Christianity has rituals to help absolve you from sin, such as through baptism. Many religions have tried to explain away the source of our suffering in this lifetime. And again, going back to the monotheistic religions, it's that we were imperfect, we were tainted, so that's why we have to suffer through this life to pay back for our impurity, if you will. The Hindu religion has a lot different philosophy about this, and to some extent, the Buddhist philosophy, which is not a religion, it's a philosophy. And by extension, other branches of Buddhism, Hinduism, right? They have other explanations for this, and that's the law of karma, right? The law of cause and effect. In that we have this repetition of lives, and in the repetition of lives, we accumulate debt. We have good debt and we have bad debt. We have debt owed to us and we have debt we must repay. And so many of these philosophies and religions explain away suffering in that we have a debt to repay. So that's why we have to suffer. In both monotheistic religions and Hinduism, branches of Hinduism, as well as Buddhism, there is this notion of we come into the world imperfect. And so we have these debts we're needing to repay in order for us to elevate our soul or come into perfection with oneness, which is God. To some extent, the Buddha resolved the issue, the problem, and so to some extent did Vedic philosophy, ancient philosophy from India as well. So these ancient societies, in some respect, started to piece together the reasons for our suffering and why we suffer. And in essence, here's the key. You are the source of your suffering. I am the source of my suffering. It's our ego, our desires, our impatience, our selfishness, our isolation from soul, spirit, source that cause us to be in suffering. And I know it's a very difficult concept to grasp right now for you if this is brand new for you. So if you were raised in a monotheistic religion, then you might be thinking that is completely absurd. How can I be the source of my own suffering? And even to some extent, if you were raised in Hinduism, or to some extent in a facet of Buddhism, you might be thinking like, well, no, that's just my karma, or no, that's just whatever, right? So you might be thinking like, no, that's just original sin. And in essence, when you really come down to it, you are the source of your suffering. Now, here is why I say that. The reason I say that, and I'm going to do a whole other video on fate and free will. But the reason I say that is because all of us are born with free will. To some extent, we have fated events which are destined to happen in our lives. But our free will gives us the choice to interpret those events and the path to take during those events and which path to choose that leads us toward our destiny. So there's this interplay between fate and free will. So for example, if you have a karmic debt to repay, you can within yourself create resistance to repaying that debt. Because, for example, if you notice that you have these crazy patterns that are destructive to your being, and you keep repeating the same patterns and you refuse to see how you can exit those patterns through your own free will, then you are the cause of the repetitious suffering, even though the debt may have been a karmic debt at its origin. And so how do we cause our own suffering? We cause our own suffering through our will, desire, and the egocentricity of who we are. For example, if you enter into a romantic relationship with the expectation that the other person must change to fill your portrayal of how that person should be in a relationship, then throughout the course of that relationship, you will experience suffering because it's nearly impossible to make another person fit the bill for something that you have created within your own mind. On the same token, if you are under the illusion, for example, that you need to make a certain amount of money that might be unrealistic for you at this particular moment. So let's say currently you're making $50,000 a year and you decide I have to have $2 million a year to be satisfied with my life. That is the course of your own suffering. So if each time you do not attain making $2 million a year, you're going to be dissatisfied, sad, upset, frustrated, and suffering in yourself because you're only making 50,000, or maybe you squeak up to 100,000, but you're still not satisfied because of the level of expectations that you've set for yourself that are so out of the ordinary high for you and your situation at this particular time, that in between those stages, even if you do make it to $2 million a year eventually, but in between those stages, you are perpetually suffering. You're perpetually dissatisfied. I also know people who create their own suffering based on their past. Now, does this have anything to do with you, perhaps? So the basis for creation of their own suffering of their past, which you cannot control and you cannot change. What has happened in the past has happened. So there's nothing you can do today to change the course of actions of what has happened in the past. You can choose to create new actions, but you cannot change what has already happened. But I know people who cause their own suffering by replaying the records, by replaying the memories of their past. And they either blame themselves, rehashing out those details, they blame others, or they stay in wishful pattern of, I wish this could have been a different scenario. I wish this could have been a different outcome. And you can't redo the past that is already done. If you continue to delve into that time and again, you will create your own suffering. Refusal to let go of ego-based things. For example, and I do mention this in my book, for example, if you are constantly offended by what other people say to you or what other people are doing, or if you're constantly offended by society, social groups, political parties, your country's policies, if you are consistently offended and upset by these things, feeling that people are doing these things to you or against you, you are the cause of your own suffering. So I hope you're beginning to see that suffering, for the most part, is a choice. You can choose to remain in suffering, or you can opt for liberation. Now let's address a more pressing topic, which I'm sure you are already concerned about if you've made it this far in watching this video, which I hope you have. And that is, yes, there are real circumstances in which you will suffer. For example, if you were born with a disability and you don't have the use of your arms or your legs, or you're born blind or deaf, of course, those things are going to affect you in your day-to-day. And yes, those things might cause you some suffering. However, it's your free will choice after that suffering to be able to use the other faculties that you have to the best of your ability to select a mindset that will help you in life rather than hinder you in life, even though you may be experiencing some physical ailments, some physical suffering as a result of that, okay? And I do know people that have mental disabilities and mental illnesses, and those two are causes of suffering. But again, you can look at these disabilities, these mental illnesses, as a means to transcend your limitations in very different ways than you might have transcended had you had all of your faculties. And so we all come onto earth bearing our own crosses, right? To put it in Christian terms, because I was raised Christian, so I sometimes have those analogies. But we all have our cross to bear. And it may come in very different forms, and often does come in different forms for different people. And also, even within the same family, those crosses you have to bear may come even differently between siblings, even though you were raised in the same household. So for example, if your family suffers from alcoholism or drug addiction, and you have 4 siblings, you might be suffering from alcohol or drug addiction while your 3 other siblings don't have any issues with it. But rest assured, it's likely that they have other crosses that they have to bear with having been raised in the same family. So we all have something. We all have something that could potentially be a source of suffering that we did not actively select, that we did not actively choose, but it is your decision for the interpretation of what that suffering means that creates the force, the power moving forward in your life to make the active decision as to, am I going to let this continue to produce suffering in me? Or am I going to elect to live in the present moment to the best of my ability that I can and connect to spirit, source, energy so that I can transcend suffering? And we all know of extreme stories of people in history who were in horrendous situations that transcended their own suffering. One example was Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned for 25 years and who came out as a leader. The Apostle Paul, who was imprisoned for most of his life, wrote 2/3 of the Bible. So we do know that there are people who have lived and have transcended their own suffering in the confines of the physical aspects of life that they couldn't necessarily control. I could probably give you hundreds of thousands of other examples, but we really don't have time for that in this video. And so what I'm calling you to do is to look at your own life today. Get a journal, and throughout this series, I'm going to be asking you to really journal some of these lessons as it pertains to your life, and write down my sources of suffering on the top of the page, and then underneath that, list out the ways in which you suffer each day. And as you do that, whenever you're feeling imbalanced, upset, frustrated, impatient, angry, irate, depressed, or anxious, ask yourself, am I causing my own suffering by the interpretation of this event and the emotions that I'm linking to it? And if so, how can I turn that around so that I'm living more from my centered, balanced state rather than living within the confines of human suffering? So I hope this was helpful for you in your healing journey. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for subscribing to my channel below. Click on the bell, scroll up to all for all notifications. And thank you for giving the video a thumbs up. Thank you for sharing this video with others who could use a little healing in their lives. Thank you so much for your support of my YouTube channel. You can buy one of my 10 published books. You can join my online meditation course. This is a self-directed course, but you also get to meet with me over Zoom to get your personalized mantra. And I appreciate all the likes and the subscribes, and I'll see you guys in the next video.